this recorded webinar. So for those of you who would like the content, you will most definitely receive that from me within the next day or so.
Okay. So Amber, I think we're going to go ahead and get started.
Yep, I think we're good to go. Thanks, Andrea.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrea Barton-Rees. I am the CEO of Connecticut's Paid Leave Authority, and I want to welcome you to our webinar today. I know the one that you signed up for, it says, hey, do you have a minute? When someone knocks on your door and says they're preparing to take some form of leave. I'm going to use a presentation that we call How Paid Leave Applies to Your Business and Tools for HR Professionals. It will give you the same content, but with a little more detail, and then we can have questions and answers after that. So again, thank you for being here. All right, so let's get started. Just a little bit about me. I started in March of 2020, maybe 3 days before the pandemic hit. And I come from a non-for-profit background. I spent about a decade at HARC supporting people with intellectual disabilities. Okay. And that is our General Counsel, Erin, who does some of our webinars from time to time. So I'm in a PDF mode, so I'll be scrolling, so just forgive me as I move from page to page. So our agenda today is this. We'll talk a bit about the paid leave program, and then we'll draw the distinction between family and medical leave and Connecticut paid leave. We will speak with a fair amount of detail about how to implement the paid leave law and what the coordination between paid leave benefits and employer-provided benefits might look like. We will also touch on Connecticut family and medical leave, which is not covered by our program or our agency. But when people take family and medical leave, Connecticut paid leave is one of the ways that they can access income replacement, which is why it's important for us to cover both of those. We'll also speak to additional resources that are available to you on our website, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. Okay, and is my page now going to participate? No, it's not going to let me do that. All right, let's talk a bit about the Paid Leave Authority. We have a 5-part mission, primarily determined by our statute, and our mission really is to provide ways that families can get access and workers can get access to paid family leave benefits, and to help employers and administrators and healthcare providers to be able to understand the program better and understand what their roles are. Our responsibilities include outreach and engagement, so thank you for being here today, and to develop the policies and procedures that we need to run the program. We also established the trust fund contribution rate, which by statute cannot exceed more than 0.5%, and we receive those contributions into the Paid Leave Trust Fund. We audit and approve private plans, so for those employers who have chosen to provide their own paid leave benefit pursuant to the statute, we do approve that, and we also will be auditing. And finally, as we'll be starting soon, we administer claims for paid leave benefits. Here are some of the key dates that you should be aware of. We started about this time last year with employer registration opening. Employers were then asked to, by law, withhold 0.5% from worker wages and start contributing those to the Paid Leave Trust Fund on those dates that you see there, which are 30 days after the end of the quarter. For those employers that chose to offer their own plan, private plan applications opened in February of this year. Starting in December, those that have contributed, sole proprietors and self-employed individuals will begin to be able to submit applications for benefits, and benefits will begin in January of 2022. So which employers are covered by the paid leave statute? They are those employers that have one or more people that work in Connecticut, and they do include not-for-profits and private sector employers that have unionized workforces. Sole proprietors or self-employed individuals who choose to participate may opt in, and if they do so, they have to remain in the program for a minimum of 3 years. If you are a sole proprietor or self-employed individual and you have employees to whom you issue a W-2, you may opt in or out of the program, but your employees must participate by law. Those worker and employer entities that are not covered by the paid leave program include the federal government and its employees, and some employees of the state of Connecticut, except those that are considered covered public employees, and I'll review that definition in a moment. Municipalities and local or regional boards of education are also generally exempt, and non-public elementary and secondary schools are completely exempt. There are other entities that may be exempt as a result of other laws, and that can include railroad workers, those that work for other sovereign nations, which includes the 2 tribal nations in our state, those that engage in interstate commerce that may work in the state but live someplace else, and the spouses of active military duty members who may live and be in the state but pay their taxes in their home state. Let's talk a bit about covered public employees. They are defined as non-unionized employees of the state of Connecticut. Those who are unionized may choose to collectively bargain to be included in the program. Employees that work for municipalities, or local or regional boards of education may participate if the unionized employees of the municipality or the unionized employees of the local or regional boards of education collectively bargain to be a part of the program. If, for example, you work for a town or a city and the unionized employees of that town or city choose to collectively bargain to be included in the program, that decision is binding on everyone who works at that town or for that town or city, whether or not they are in the bargaining unit. And you can see at the bottom, there is an expansive definition of municipality, which can include the way we usually think about it, towns and cities, but can also include flood commissions or regional councils of government. How do we manage the 0.5% that's being collected? We do that by having the employer withhold the wages of 0.5%, and that is done post-tax through FICA. And those contributions are capped at the Social Security contribution limit of $142,800. The employer then remits those to the Paid Leave Authority, and we validate those contributions based on wage data we have available to us from the Department of Labor and the Department of Revenue Services. Those contributions are deposited into the Paid Leave Trust Fund, which is held and managed by the Office of the Treasurer. And it is from that trust fund that paid leave benefits are paid. All right, so earlier when I walked through our agenda, I spoke about the distinction between FMLA and Connecticut paid leave. So let's talk a bit first about family and medical leave. What is it exactly? Some of you may be very familiar. For those of you who probably have 50 or fewer or 75 or 74 or fewer employees, this will be new to you. So FMLA stands for the Family and Medical Leave Act. There is both a state and federal corollary of that law, but they both provide job protected time away. And job protection is defined as you're being eligible to take time away under FMLA and return to work to your same job. And also, you cannot be terminated during the time that you are out on FMLA, and you can't be terminated for having taken FMLA. Right now, if someone takes FMLA today, that leave is unpaid, but some employers do have policies that allow for a person to continue to get paid while they're out, and some also have short-term, long-term disability policies, their own paid leave program. But for the most part, employers usually require or allow employees to use whatever time they've accrued to cover all or part of the time that they're out on leave. And as the law stands today, they can ask them to exhaust all of that time to cover their time away. When the law changes next year, that will be significantly different. Here's a comparison that allows us to look at what our current FMLA law is and what it will look like starting next year. As I mentioned earlier, for Connecticut family and medical leave, it only applied to employers that had 75 or more employees, and the threshold for participation was fairly high. You had to have worked for your employer for at least 12 months, it didn't have to be consecutive, and 1,000 hours. And once you've done that, you would have been able to get up to 16 weeks of leave in a 2-year period. Let me just get with this. In a 2-year period, job protection would attach after you finish that 12-month period. And the employer can now today require you to use all of your accrued time to cover the time off that you're away on FMLA. Starting in January, this changes significantly. FMLA will apply to all employers with 1 or more employees. There will be no hours worked requirement, and all that will be required is a person to enjoy job protection will be for them to have worked for the employer for 3 months. They will have 12 weeks of leave in a 12-month period. Excuse me, and as the case today, there's 26 weeks of leave available for military caregivers, with 12 weeks of those weeks of leave being paid. There may be an additional 2 weeks of leave available if a person is experiencing incapacitation during their pregnancy. And finally, the most significant difference is that an employer can still require an employee to use their time off, but they must allow them to keep up to 2 weeks of their accrued PTO. And this particular provision came about because during the comment period, hearing period for Connecticut paid leave and FMLA, the most common feedback that was received by the committee of cognizance was that people would take their FMLA and then be left with nothing for the remainder of the time that they had, and they were missing weddings and graduations and dream vacations and other critical life experiences. So that is the reason why a person now keeps 2 weeks of their leave. So let's compare that to Connecticut paid leave. We often refer to it as CTPL, and it does refer to the statute, the program, and the agency itself. It is strictly a Connecticut law that provides a source of income replacement. It does not provide job protected leave at all. And we also refer to it as PFML, or paid family and medical leave. The way that it works with family and medical leave is that a person would seek to take leave for a reason covered by family and medical leave, and then Connecticut paid leave may be one of the ways that income replacement can happen while they're out. Here are the reasons that a person could seek leave for FMLA and for income replacement under the Paid Leave Act. They can take leave to receive treatment for their own serious health condition or that of a family member. And that serious health condition can include pregnancy or serving as an organ or bone marrow donor. They can take it to bond with a newborn or a child that's been newly placed in their home through adoption or foster care, and that's also known as bonding leave. Care can be taken to, time can be taken to care for a family member who's been injured on active duty, known as military caregiver leave. That's the 26 weeks I spoke of earlier, with 12 of those weeks being paid. And the same is true for qualifying exigency leave. What's unique to Connecticut is that for 12 days, a person may take leave to attend to issues that arise from being impacted by family violence. Our state has had a family violence law for quite some time, but that leave could be taken, but it was unpaid. And this law changes that. Let's talk a bit about caregiver leave. The definition of who a caregiver can be and the reason and the people for whom time can be taken in order to provide care will expand significantly starting in January. Under the new law, a person will be able to take time off to take care of these categories of people who have a serious health condition, a parent, a spouse. What's critical here is a son or daughter of any age, because as of today, you can only take time off to care for a son or daughter who's under 18, or if they're over 18, you can take it if they have a disability, and that will change next year. You weren't able to take time off to take care of a sibling or grandparents or grandchildren, and that will change as well. What's most important here is the related by affinity. So let me go through that. So in addition to the categories that I noted earlier, you can also seek to receive paid leave benefits to care for a person who is related to you by affinity. And that means a person with whom you have a significant personal bond that's like family, even though you may not have a biological or legal relationship with them. Excuse me. And those relationships have to be the same or as closely aligned to the ones that are already in the statute: parent, spouse, sibling, grandparent, grandchildren. Let's talk a bit about the summary of eligibility for each of the types of family and medical leave and income replacement that we will be looking at in the following year. Federal family and medical leave remains the same, and that law has always applied to employers that have 50 or more employees. You would still have to work for 12 months, and you'd still have to work 1,250 hours to qualify for federal leave. As I mentioned earlier, there's no longer an hours worked requirement for Connecticut, and job protection attaches at 3 months. But in order to seek income replacement, a person has to meet these earnings criteria of earning at least $2,325 in the highest earning quarter of what we consider the base period, which are the 5 completed quarters of time. And then they have to have one of the reasons for leave. They have to be working, currently employed and working in the state, or if they had recently left or had separated from that role, they can still apply for leave up to 12 weeks after the time that they've left. Obviously, sole proprietors and self-employed individuals who have a residency requirement can and who have opted into the plan can also obviously qualify for income replacement benefits. And what do they get? Just a summary of entitlements. And they include, 12 weeks in a 12-month period for FMLA for federal. And the reasons I noted before, 12 weeks in a 12-month period for Connecticut job protected leave, 26 weeks for military caregiver, with 12 of those being paid, 12 days for family violence, an additional 2 weeks for incapacitation during pregnancy. The same reasons for job protected leave exist for eligibility for income replacement benefits. Right. So I've talked a lot about the laws, and on the left-hand side, you can see that there's a summary of the laws in our state that provide job protected leave, meaning a person is able to return to their job, or they can ask for a reasonable accommodation to remain in their role while they have some sort of serious health condition that they're contending with, whether it's acute or chronic. That includes federal FMLA, Connecticut FMLA, workers' compensation, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Pregnancy Disability Act, and what many employers don't know is that they are also subject to the Connecticut Fair Employment Practice Act if you have 3 or more employees. And under those last 3 acts, a leave may be considered a reasonable accommodation to allow a person to continue to perform the essential functions of their job. On the right side of the screen, you'll see that in addition to workers' compensation as a form of income replacement under the law for leave, the Connecticut Paid Leave Act is there as well. With an important note here that a person who is receiving workers' compensation benefits or unemployment insurance benefits at the same time cannot receive paid leave benefits simultaneously. All right, so let's talk a bit about how you actually implement the Paid Leave Act. Here is what we call our responsibility chart with respect to Connecticut paid leave and the making of contributions to the fund. Workers are responsible for contributing 0.5% of their FICA wages up to the Social Security contribution limit. Employers have to create an account and register, and many of you have already done this, deduct 0.5% and remit it to the Paid Leave Authority. At the authority, we receive and reconcile those contributions. We do process any over or underpayments, and starting next year, we will do this with plenty of notice. We will start imposing penalties on those employers that are not complying. In the beginning of this year, it was just such a whirlwind and such a stressful time, and in many ways it still is for many of us. But over 122,000 employers have already registered. So we know that the word is out, and we will be looking for other employers to comply. It is the Connecticut Department of Labor that determines whether or not an employer may get additional time or have permission to collect money that they had not collected because they were not aware of their obligation to collect. That is not a decision that's made by the Paid Leave Authority. The DOL can do that based on their general wage and hour authority under their statutes and regulations. So now when it comes to actually administering claims, here are our responsibilities for Connecticut paid leave, as well as others. So the worker has to submit an application in a timely fashion. And if they're doing it online, they will be required to create an account to secure their data. They'll have to provide us with supporting documentation and update their account if there's changes to absences or anything else. So employers will be notified about Connecticut paid leave claim. Employers are required to provide an employment verification, which is a form that the employee will give to you. You'll need to validate their absences on that form. And if you know of any other sources of income they might have, which, for example, if they have PTO time that you're going to require them to use first, we will be asking about that. You should let the workers know about your own PTO policies, including whether or not there's any eligibility for short-term disability participation, and also to refrain from discriminating or retaliating against workers for using their paid leave benefit. At the authority, along with our partner AFLEC, we essentially process all aspects of the claim, determining eligibility, assessing any request for reconsideration, investigating potential fraud, and it is the authority that has the right to impose penalties if there is fraud or abuse of the system. The DOL, Department of Labor, is the entity that hears appeals that are related to the denials of claims, disputes with respect to benefits, if those are in fact are denied, and to any penalties we may impose for fraud, waste, or abuse. A little bit more detail about how a person might actually apply for the benefit. The worker submits a claim. You can see the details under there. We will ask them a number of things, including their reasons and the length of leave and the type of leave. AFLEC, along with us, will determine the eligibility by asking for a lot of information that had come in with the application, and there's a checklist that can be used. They also determine whether the claim is approved by reviewing the supporting documentation, and they'll let the worker know if something's missing. If the claim is denied, they'll also let them know if they have an opportunity to cure that denial by providing more information. If the claim is approved, however, which is what we call the happy path, they will calculate the benefit, and they'll take into consideration types of leaves, other offsets for other income. I just want to be very clear about what this means. It means that if, for example, as I noted earlier, an employer says, well, a person has 5 weeks of leave, they're taking an 8-week leave, they are entitled to keep 2 weeks of leave. So we're going to require them to use 3 weeks of that leave to cover the first 3 weeks of their 8-week leave. And then we at the Paid Leave Authority will pay the remaining 5. That's what we mean by taking into consideration other types of leaves and offsets, meaning that we would not pay for the full 8 weeks if the employer requires that person to pay for, to use their PTO to cover part of it. They issue the benefit payments. They are either on a card or directly into bank accounts. There will be no checks issued, and payments will always be made 2 weeks in arrears on a Tuesday. The worker is responsible for letting us know if there are any changes, including if there's early return to work, any changes in income, and those that are taking intermittent leave, sometimes for chronic conditions like asthma or migraines, we will be requiring them to check in with us more frequently than people who are out on block leaves, so that we can know if there are any changes in schedules that might not align with the documentation they provided around the frequency and the type of leave they're taking. How much does a person get? So if they are making less than or equal to the minimum wage, then they will get 95% of their base weekly earnings. If they earn more than that, then they get the difference between the 95% and what they make, and that is how we calculate their weekly benefit. But under no circumstances anyone get more than 60 times the prevailing minimum wage, which is $780 a week. So here's an example of that. So the minimum wage now is $13 an hour. We have worker A that earns minimum wage, and the math here is pretty simple. They will get 95%, and that's $494 an hour. Worker B earns above minimum wage. They earn $13.50. So we then calculate their base weekly earnings at $540 a week. So they're going to get a benefit amount that is the 95% of the base weekly wage, and then 60% of the difference between what they make and what the base weekly earnings are, and that is $12, so they get $506. All right, so I know that many employers offer PTO and short-term disability and the like, but I'm really just going to focus on paid time off today. So the column to the far left just states a baseline that employers can permit or require the employee to use their PTO to cover all or part of their leave, but a reminder that they have to allow them to keep the 2 weeks. So if a worker has no PTO to use, then they will receive the full amount of benefit for the full period, and we do that at the Paid Leave Authority. If they have enough to pay them for their regular pay, meaning 100%, and that is available to them through their employer, then there's no benefit payable to the worker through paid leave. The question we often get is, then what are they paying for? What they're paying for is insurance, because workers are mobile and they move from one job to another. So while they may be working for one employer where they have a very generous benefit, they may move to another that might not have one that is as generous. And so when they move to that new employer, they'll have the opportunity to participate in the plan. If they have PTO that covers part of their leave, as I noticed earlier, then the CTO benefits start when the pay leave benefits start when the PTO benefits by the employer are exhausted. The example I gave earlier of the 8 weeks and the 5 weeks speaks to that directly. And then finally, if the worker has PTO that is less than their regular pay, then we pay our benefits pursuant to the law, which is that maximum up to the 780. And then the employer and the employee can coordinate whatever other benefits might be available. It might be taking part of their PTO, it might be their short-term disability or other employer paid types of leaves, so that the employee can get 100% of their benefit, but they should of their pay, but they should never get more than 100% of their pay. What do workers need to know? They should be asking a few questions. And as Amber mentioned, you will be getting a copy of this presentation. And this slide is actually one that others have shared with their workers. You will need to tell them whether or not they are required or permitted to use their time off while they're out on leave, and what all the rules are that will cover their time while they're away. If you offer a short-term disability policy, how that's used, do they need to exhaust their state benefit first and then come? Or if it will reduce the amount of money that's paid. So there's lots of questions that need to be answered. And there is a fair degree of complexity along with that, which we understand and appreciate. I'll talk a bit now about FMLA. I did mention in the earlier part of our presentation that the Family and Medical Leave Act itself is governed by the Department of Labor. But since there's such a close correlation between that and paid leave, we do like to mention it in our presentations. The responsibility of workers when it comes to taking family and medical leave is to inform an employer as soon as they can about their need to take FMLA. Keeping in mind, they don't have to come into your office and say, I need to take FMLA. If they say, I need to have surgery in the next 2 weeks and I'll be out for 3 weeks, that can trigger FMLA. They need to submit an application and then provide you with supporting documentation. The employer has a number of responsibilities that include establishing a leave policy, making sure that a poster with rights and responsibilities is made available either electronically or in a prominent place for those of you who are back in your workplaces, to manage their return to work and to refrain from discriminating against them for taking FMLA. We don't have any official role when it comes to family and medical leave, but we do provide this as part of our training. It is the Department of Labor that is responsible for promulgating regulations, providing guidance to workers, and investigating any complaints that might arise from the denial of FMLA or complaints regarding discrimination or retaliation for exercising their rights. We can walk through a little bit about how to work through a claim when someone comes and knocks on your door and says, hey, I need to have that surgery, and you now know that that's FMLA. What do you do? Need to give you 30 days advance notice if it's foreseeable, and if it's not, then as soon as practicable. You as the employer will have what we call sort of a preliminary review period, meaning that of the reasons that a person could apply for FMLA or be eligible, you're going to make a preliminary determination that the person is asking for leave for a reason that's covered under the statute. And you'll let them know that and say, fine, you're gonna have surgery. I think that's a serious health condition. You seem right now to qualify for FMLA, but you're gonna have to bring me some more things. And that's when you ask for the additional documentation. And there are checklists that are available that through DOL will make sure that you can get access to those. This is not the same thing as approving the leave. This is your preliminary discussion with them about taking the leave. All right, so once you've told the worker, I think the reason that you've articulated for leave is one that's covered under the statute, and I need to get some records from you. They have 15 days to get those records to you, and they can be a medical certification, adoption documents, military records. If they're having trouble getting them, Sometimes medical professionals can take a bit of time to fill out those certifications. You could give them an additional 15 days. Sometimes you can give them an additional 15 days on top of that. But if they don't get it to you in time, then you do have the right to say that you've not provided that information. Therefore, their request is being denied until you can get that information. So assuming they give you everything that they need, then you will receive that and you'll have 5 days to make a decision as to whether or not everything is received and in order and they qualify for FMLA and you're granting it. Then you have to tell them how you're going to use it, when they need to report in, and whether or not they will need to provide a fitness for duty before reporting to work, knowing that they do not have to be 100% fit for duty to return under FMLA. A little ahead of myself here. Then the worker has to report to the employer when they actually take their leave. This is particularly important if they're taking intermittent leave. So if they're going for treatment and they go on Wednesdays from 2 to 4 and they go again on Friday from 1 to 3, they will move through that 12-week period more slowly than if they were out for, let's say, 6 weeks at a time for recuperation from surgery or a serious health condition. It's important to know that when a worker returns, they have the right to return to their job with the same terms and conditions, salary, hours worked, responsibilities. And you cannot insist that an employee be 100% fit for duty or to be totally recovered, but they should be able to perform the essential functions of their job. And you do have to consider any other Americans with Disabilities Act or Connecticut Fair Employment Practice Act obligations you might have to create a reasonable accommodation to allow that person to return to work. That is an entire seminar in and of itself, and we'll probably be encouraging the Department of Labor to offer some training around the reasonable accommodation. I'd mentioned earlier that managing all of this can be very complicated, and here are some of the reasons why. You don't always get the information back. Workers don't always call in and provide for their absences, or their managers are too busy actually doing their jobs and feeling like, I don't want to have to keep track of this person. There are interactions between the federal, the state, and other laws that you really have to keep track of. And often workers don't want their leave to be designated as FMLA because they don't want the clock to run. But I can't urge you enough to not permit this to occur. If a person comes in and says to you, I will be out for the next 6 weeks, or I need to be out because I'm having major surgery or significant treatment, but I don't want to use FMLA, I just want to cover it with my PTO and I'm going to take the rest unpaid. The answer to that is always no, because the job protection component of FMLA is critical. It protects you as an employer, it protects the person who's taking the leave, so that if there's any challenge to whether or not the person can return to their job or they're being discriminated against, that FMLA protects both of you. All right. I covered a lot of things today. I realize that and I appreciate your patience, but there are additional resources that are available on our website, ctpaidleave.org. They include an employee rights poster, a RAC card, which is an abbreviated version of the employee rights poster, and then the fact sheet, which is more in a question and answer form, because we realize that people take in information in different ways. For you as the employer, there is an employer toolkit, which is a comprehensive guide to everything I have covered today. If you are an HR professional, even if you're not and you're about to be because the law is changing, on our site is also, and it's not on here, but I really commend this to you, is there's an HR toolkit you will also find when you go to the employer toolkit, and that has letters and forms and sample communications that you can use with your employees. We wanted to make sure that you had all that you needed because there's a lot to communicate. So I want to thank you. And if you have questions, we are here to help. We do not have a call center because they are exorbitantly expensive. And we want to use as much benefit payment money as we have for actually paying benefits. So we have a contact us feature on our web portal, ctpaidleave.org. And if you go to that portal and submit your question, you can ask for a call back and someone will call you back. We also have a lot of frequently asked questions and videos that may answer some of the questions that you might have. And so I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and see if there are any questions you might have. And thank you for your time.
Hey, Andrea, we do have one in the QA.
All right.
This one's coming from Margarita. It says, can you explain the overlap of the federal FMLA and the Connecticut FMLA and the Connecticut paid leave?
Yeah. All right. So great question. The fact of the matter is that when the Connecticut FMLA changes in 2022, it will be more challenging to run both federal FMLA and state FMLA concurrently. And that's because the time frame for when job protection attaches and the amount of time that a person has to work in order to be eligible for FMLA will be considerably different between those two laws. So as an example, for federal FMLA, if you notice in the chart I had earlier, you have to work for your employer for a year and 1,250 hours. And once you've done that, then you get 12 weeks in a 12-month period. For Connecticut FMLA, for 12 weeks in a 12-month period, and then also, let me just go back to federal, and that's when job protection attaches. For Connecticut FMLA, there's no hours worked requirement, and job protection attaches after 3 months. So while you might be able to run those two leaves concurrently, it's going to be tough to do that because the timeframes for eligibility are different, very different, and they will be starting next year. So that's the intersection between those two. Now, how those two relate to Connecticut paid leave is this. The federal has no correlation and no interaction with Connecticut paid leave at all. If a person is taking leave under the reasons that qualify for Connecticut paid leave. So let me just go back. Let's just start with FMLA, because we used to teach it this way, so I'm going to frame it this way. Think about when a person comes into your office and says, I need to take time off, and you as an employer know it is a qualifying reason under FMLA. Don't think about anything else. Now the question you're going to ask is, how is this person going to get income replacement while they're out? And you may have a number of options, one of which is Connecticut paid leave. So the person might have PTO, they might have short-term disability, they might have another kind of benefit that you provide, and they also have Connecticut paid leave. And you might say, okay, you're going to take this time off, you're going to get me the documentation that I need. We're going to assume you're going to get me everything I need in a timely manner, and then I'm going to approve your FMLA. Now let's figure out how you get paid for that FMLA. And that can be all the things I noted earlier, and it can be, you don't have any of those things, so you go directly to the paid leave authority, and it can be, you have 5 weeks of PTO. Our policy requires that you use your PTO first to cover any time that you're out on FMLA, and if you don't have anything left to cover the rest of the time that you're out to get paid, then you can go to the paid leave authority. And that's how those work together. So you really want to think about federal FMLA in its own bucket, even more so starting next year when it's going to be tough to run those things together. And then you want to think about someone coming in for state FMLA and their qualification. And then while they're out, how are they going to get paid? That's the best way to frame it. And then it'll help with some of the confusion.
Thank you, Andrea. Would you please explain how the short-term disability and Connecticut leave coordinates? I know we've had a lot of questions on this one.
We have, and it's hard for me to answer that because I don't know the terms and conditions of all of the policies. And the way that it coordinates has everything to do with what the terms and conditions are under your policy. What we will do at the paid leave authority is we will pay the person based on their wages that are earned in that base period, and according to the formula in the statute, with the maximum being the 780, which is the 60 times the 13. In many cases, that might not meet what the person is receiving in their full-time current wages. So then they will come to the employer, and if your short-term disability policy allows them to top up, so to speak, or if you have other types of employer paid benefits that allow them to get to 100% of their wages, that is something that your employee will come back to you and say, I'm only getting $780 from the paid leave authority. That's the maximum benefit I can get. I make $1,400 a week. I need you to help me figure out a way to make up the difference. That's how they coordinate. Some policies, short-term disability policies, require that the person exhaust their state benefit first. So they may get the 780 and then use their PTO to make up the difference. And once they've done that, for whatever number of weeks that covers, then they can then access any benefit that's available in their short-term disability. That is essentially how it will work.
Thank you, Andrea. So this is coming from Margarita. We happen to offer parental caregiver leave and short-term disability benefits. Can we offset with those benefits to offset what the Connecticut paid leave offers? That's the first part of this question.
Okay. So I don't know if I'd use the word offset more so than I would characterize it as supplementing what a person might get if it doesn't bring them, if what they're getting from the paid leave authority doesn't bring them to 100% of their wages. So, so noting the example I gave earlier, if you have parental leave and you have short-term disability and the person, let's say, only gets a 40%, that even at the maximum benefit, they're only getting 40% of their weekly earnings, then those other benefits that you offer can be used to bring that person up to 100% of their wages. But I think you're asking a different question, which is, can you use, depending on the percentages of wage replacement that's available through parental leave and short-term disability and the paid leave authority, kind of bring that person to 100%, and looking at it more as an offset of what they receive to lower your employer paid obligation? And the answer is, we don't really calculate it that way, and most states don't. They try to, but it is an unsuccessful way to get benefits paid. So you can use any combination of employer provided benefit that you like, as long as the person does not get more than 100% of their wages.
Thank you. The second part of this question is, are the Connecticut employees required to apply for paid leave? Just for instance, some states make it an optional benefit and find employees stack benefits for 6+ months off of work. Can you talk to us about that?
Mm-hmm. All right, so people are, employees, which are very broadly defined in the statute, are obligated to contribute to the plan. They are not obligated to apply to the plan. That is something that is strictly up to them. But the stacking issue that you raise is a very important one, and we hear about this all the time, which is why we encourage employers to look very carefully at their policies, and why some employers have chosen to have their employees use their PTO, because that will help with the stacking that we're talking about. So if, for example, you have a person that is eligible for federal leave and then again eligible for Connecticut FMLA, and then still has eligibility under Connecticut paid leave because they haven't used any of their paid leave benefit, there is a possibility they could put all that together, right, and be out for 6 months. But the way to avoid that is to make sure that you have people running their leaves as concurrently, as close to concurrently as you can, and also requiring people to use up their leave time in a way that tries to avoid stacking. We hear this all the time because the statute was never intended for stacking to occur. That is not what it was designed to do.
Thank you, Andrea. We do have a person, one of our attendees with their hand up. I'd like to let them in so they can ask their question.
Sure, okay, that's fine.
Ellen, you're up. Ellen,
I see your hand up, but you're still on mute. Ellen, are you still with us? I wonder if he just stepped away for a moment. Okay, I don't see him.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't have any other questions in the QA, but we do want to answer your questions. If any of you would like to ask, just go ahead and raise your hand. I'd be happy to unmute you so you can ask your questions.
Sure.
We have
hopefully,
plenty of time left still.
Yeah, and maybe Alan will return. We'll see
yes.
if he has a chance to come back. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see two other people raise their hands. Or maybe that's Alan and another person. Margarita, yes.
Hi, thank you for such insightful answers to my questions. My other question is really circled around technology. You mentioned a paper form. Is that something that we're going to be able to just complete online? Is there going to be a portal to kind of help us as employers manage these claims?
I know it's almost blasphemous to have a paper form. I understand, I do, but the reality is that we were under such aggressive timelines that we didn't have enough time to build that piece in electronically. But it's on the agenda to make it electronic as soon as we possibly can. So we're asking employers to just indulge us right now, and then we are working so hard to put that employer verification form online. That is definitely a high priority. But as soon as we did it, we said,
so
we're not
potentially there'll be a generic form available to us that we could use to respond to each claim individually, or do we really have to wait for the employee to provide us the copy of the form they have?
That's a great question. So if you, it's actually both. So if you have that, if you go into that HR toolkit that I mentioned on the website, the form is in there. And some employers are already just taking that form and copying it and keeping it, which is good until we can get it up online, because it's the exact same form. We're not
perfect.
Right. We're not going to be making any changes to it right now. No, I lie. I think we did make a couple of changes to it and we'll be reissuing it, but we're going to try to make it available on our website. So I'm actually going to make a note about that to see when it will be available. Okay. Yeah. So we were hoping it could also be filled in online, but again, we apologize. We just weren't able to get that done in time and have the benefits launch when they should, but we're going to work on fixing that.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Ellen, have you returned? Doesn't look that way. Okay.
All right, Andrea, I think that concludes our questions for today.
Okay.
So everyone that's with us, if you do find that you have questions after the webinar, please do go to our ConnecticutPaidLeave.org. I'll drop the link in the chat, and use our Contact Us portal. We'll have somebody follow up with you to get those questions answered. And as a reminder, you will receive a copy of the presentation Andrea has given, along with the link to this recorded webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Andrea?
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. Everyone, have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.